As part of the journey into preparing for 2.4, we've been building characters around some of the major skills being modified, so we can look at how they perform prior to the patch's release and after. The difference today is that we're looking at a skill tied to an already popular, but often misunderstood build, the Summon Necromancer. While we are looking at the upcoming changes to the Skeleton Magi as part of this, we're also going to talk about how the optimal setup for Summoner Necromancers is not exactly what you'll find on a lot of build guides. And heck, I'm even guilty of not clarifying it when we have done builds like the Aura Commander in the past, since we chose our setup there for aura density, not necessarily efficiency. But one nice thing about the current optimal setup is that it will, interestingly, be made even better with the planned changes. That said, as usual for most builds, we just get the stats we need for our gear. In this case, the bare minimum strength for setup we want, and everything else is going into vitality, since generally what will be hitting you as a summoner is not going to be blockable, so we don't waste it on dexterity, and you'll have no mana problems if you set up the rest of your gear properly and use an Insight Golem. In terms of skills, since we're focusing in on Skeleton Magi due to the 2.4 patch, we do change it up a bit from a few of the more common builds, but the reality is, ideal summoner builds generally have a lot of points to spare regardless, so much so that even with the Skeleton Magi in the gameplay footage, I had forgotten that I had left 30 points unused from when I was still respecking and equipping the character. Between then and now, I've invested those points into increasing Corpse Explosion radius and bumping up our Iron Golem's life, but as you can tell, it does not matter much. As far as what you do invest in the initial summoner setup, for classic builds it's 20 points in raised skeletons for quantity and 20 points in skeleton mastery for quality, and a point in all of your 1-point wonders. Then you spend the ton of remaining points into whatever variant you prefer. Since we're going Magi, we do spend the additional 20 points into Skeleton Magi just to get them as far along as possible, though chances are, well, pretty much guaranteed, this will be more valuable in 2.4 than it is here, since the Skeleton Magi scaling is currently mediocre at best, but usually more in the realm of just kind of sad, even with lower resist and conviction. As far as what your 1-point wonders are going to be, they're going to be your revives, your base golems, your summon resist, and your choice of curses. Which, for the curses in this case, we run our entire right side down to the lower resist, just so we'll have it to test out in the upcoming patch. Our dump skills for remaining points, though, as mentioned, are going to be Corpse Explosion for a reasonable radius, though it's not super important as long as it's large enough to hit a cluster of enemies. The other dump point is Golem Mastery, just so we're not needing to spend more resources than necessary on our Iron Golems. Though since Insights are cheap, it's not a big deal if they die every now and then, you just don't want them to die every game, because that can get hard to find enough 4-socket polearms for. Now, where you think most people would make their mistakes on summoners would be on their personal equipment, though not really, since mostly stacking plus skills is pretty hard to mess up. Instead, the big mistake is optimizing for damage per hit in your mercenary equipment, and you'll find this with the selection of Pride in a lot of guides. Is Pride bad? God, no, it's actually fairly good and it works with a lot of themes. But the reality is the optimal setup is usually Infinity unless you have a large level gap above your opponents. This is because Infinity causes a massive drop in defense, which is important for your skeletons since they have relatively low attack rating compared to player characters who do melee regularly. With the upcoming boost to Skeleton Magi, this gap for Infinity becomes even stronger and, well, it grows even more. The rest of your mercenary setup, though, is thankfully fairly straightforward, and it stays the same. Might Aura is the big boost for your melee dudes, and you just slap on Resist and Life Leech for the other stuff. While Bramble is fun, it doesn't get to do much with the high-end versions of this build outside of speeding up act bosses a little, so Fortitude is usually preferred, but on the more poverty end of things, which is kind of ironic because Bramble's really kind of expensive, it can actually help you with the bosses. So it's kind of balancing it out a little bit, but usually you'll want to go for Fortitude or some other resist armor instead, just to keep your mercenary alive a lot easier. As a sort of mercenary part 2 though, we should probably mention the Iron Golem. I make it out of trash insights, kind of as we've mentioned already. Pretty much insights I can make in any 4-socket polearms I find, generally only saving a couple leveling ones for low-level characters, and then the endgame ones for mercenary use on my endgame characters. And all the rest just go into the jangling automaton that would make Hannah the Navigator proud. As far as our equipment, a lot of it is very flexible, with only 2 items we're using really being better than just more plug plus skills would be. And the first of those is probably being the most obvious, and that is Beast Axe, which we use for the Fanaticism aura for a bit of boosted damage and attack rating for our skeletons. Since while the increased attack speed does actually boost their attack animations, it doesn't do anything to reduce their AI-based cooldowns between attacks, so it's not as drastic as you would think. I also don't bother transforming with this, as I usually don't feel it's going to be, well, helping us out at all because it keeps you from casting stuff, and usually I don't feel like using the gold to replenish the bear summons, so I don't use those either. Though this could maybe change in 2.4 with some of the skill changes and how shapeshifting is planned to change. I'm doubtful it will, but you never know, it possibly could. The other major scaling force for this build is Enigma, an obvious choice for this build since it opens up access to a method of focusing fire called telestomping. Basically teleporting onto a target which focuses the fire of all your summons on that single enemy, usually decimating them. Without Enigma, you'll usually either need a teleport amulet, circlet, or if you're really desperate, a teleport staff on swap to let you focus this fire. It's not necessary to beat the game, but it does help a ton if you're doing any type of farming with this build. The reason why you see the Wire Fleece one on here is because my good ones are on other characters and I don't want to dismantle them for this guy. The rest of our gear is pretty much exclusively plus skills, with Dual Stones of Jordan in the ring slots, Arachnid's Mesh in the belt, since, well, it's the only true plus skills belt for us, Shaco on our head for an easy +2 all skills, though a good rare circlet would be a ton better for anything other than Magic Find since you're not usually going to get hit by physical damage, and you can get some other nice perks on it that can help you out a little bit more than, well, Shaco. We also left the Necrocaster amulet we use for the poison build on this guy just because it's a really bloody good amulet, though you'd probably rather have a plus strength one if you were being really picky. And we went with a +3 Bone Flame on this guy because it's an easy +3 skills. And I don't have a +3 Summon Dark Foe spawn, or that would be better, but the ideal, big air quotes here, would be really hard to get, and it's a rare that requires rerolling something like a rare Bloodlord Skull with a super low level character and perfect skulls, so you can get your plus summon skills, which are all low level skills. You need the high Q level base to get the mods that you want, and you need the low I level to get the plus skills you want, which puts it in the Pipe Dream range of rarity, and truly a near impossible item that makes Enigma look as common as cracked sasses. The last little bit we have are the boots, which we grabbed Marowak for since it's got a bit of plus stats and skeleton mastery, and Trangools for plus curses, though you could do Mage Fist for extra +1 to Corpse Explosion if you wanted it. Either works fine depending on what you want. The rest of our stuff is just the usual plus skill charms, Torch, and Annihilus with resists or Magic Find depending on preferences for the other small charms. On swap, I'd probably just stick with Call to Arms and Spirit Monarch for giving your Golem and Mercenary a health buff for bosses, but generally speaking, you won't feel the need for it in normal play. It's more a nice to have than necessity. And if you don't have an Enigma, you can put a teleport staff here. It's just whenever you swap over, you're gonna lose some skeletons because you're losing some plus skills temporarily while you teleport. All that said, in 2.4, this build could very easily get sped up by a stronger summon injection. And the fact that most of this gear is just expensive fluff on top of the one raw necessity of plus skill gear means this is going to stay a fairly friendly farming build, even if you go for a more affordable variant, since while this still likely won't be the fastest build in the game, it has and likely always will be a very safe option for just clearing a wide array of areas in the game for everyone from Prince to Pauper in softcore or hardcore.